Good morning. My name is Harry Williams. I'm the president and CEO of the Thurgood Marshall College Fund, and I would like to welcome you to the 2020 Virtual HBCU Sustainability Summit. We are so delighted that you are all here today, and you're going to learn a lot. But a special thanks to the Leadership Summit Committee, led by Dr. Rosalind Artis and Tommy Dortch, for putting on this conference. This is the third annual conference, and we're so excited that we are still going to have it here today for all of you to see and to be a part of. Again, thank you and welcome to the 2020 Virtual HBCU Summit.
Good morning. Thank you all for joining us for the third annual HBCU Sustainability Summit. As you know, historically Black colleges have been placed at center stage across the country these days, and we are fortunate today to kick off our summit with a conversation with four gentlemen who have been at the forefront of the fight to sustain our nation's HBCUs. Allow me to introduce our panelists for today. Mr. Paul Taylor, who is with NAFIO and works in the Communiversity program, which extends outreach and works on community affairs for NAFIO on behalf of all historically Black colleges, public and private. Mr. Sean Burns, who is with the Thurgood Marshall College Fund and works in government relations there, assisting and supporting the development of the HBCU agenda. His colleague and contemporary, Mr. Rodriguez Murray, who works with the United Negro College Fund and leading all of their government affairs efforts on behalf of the private higher education institutions that have the good fortune to be HBCUs. We also are particularly pleased and honored to have with us today Mr. Donald Watson, who is certainly no stranger to the HBCU community, having worked with the Department of Education for many years, leading our efforts as it relates to Title III, and now most prominently positioned to work with our nation's historically Black colleges in facilitating the HBCU Capital Finance Loan Program. Good morning, gentlemen, and welcome.
Good morning.
Thank you.
Good morning, Dr. Artis.
Thank you so much for joining us this morning. I cannot tell you how pleased we are to have the benefit of this kind of expertise all on one panel. And so I will not belabor the point, but we'll jump right into the conversation. We have a number of questions that we are excited about asking you all this morning because HBCUs are critically important and we are at a critical juncture. So we're very excited to hear from you. I have a number of prepared questions that I'll be posing to members of the panel, and then we'll open up for audience questions. So I'd like to jump right in, if that's okay with everyone. In recent years, historically Black colleges have been prominently positioned in the discourse at the federal level. In 3 to 5 minutes, please, let's summarize the progress made to advance the HBCU agenda. And I'd like to begin with Mr. Rodriguez Murray of the United Negro College Fund. Mr. Murray.
Thank you, Dr. Artis, and good morning. And thank you to all those that organized today's summit. We appreciate that. HBCUs have made a lot of progress over the last 3 or so years. You look back at fiscal year 2018, we were successful in convincing Congress in only 52 days to institute a deferment program which allowed private HBCUs, which were facing problems with their loans from the HBCU Capital Finance Program only because of the circumstances of the time, to defer those payments for up to 6 years, where the principal could not grow, the interest could not accrue, and it basically allowed those institutions to have a breather. That 52 days was record time to make sure that Congress responded to the concerns of HBCUs and showed us be possible. Over 3 fiscal years, we worked hard to make sure that year-over-year spending for HBCUs increased by some $200 million, especially the Title III program, which works hardest to sustain HBCUs. In addition to that, the Future Act was passed in December of last year. In one day, that act passed both houses. Remains in perpetuity. In addition to that, there was some $930 million in the CARES Act, which helped with the sustainability of HBCUs for the pandemic and beyond. We'd be hard pressed to mention these successes without mentioning members of Congress that have been tremendously helpful, including Alma Adams and others. But in addition to that, the community represented by some of the men you see here on the screen and ladies. But in addition to that, we worked hard to make sure that everyone was included. We brought our other MSI counterparts into the conversation to broaden our base and strengthen our message. And we've been able to use certain tools like the Economic Impact Report on HBCUs to bring more Republicans under the tent and make it a more bipartisan effort. But there still is so much more to do. And this is work that we are actively, anxiously looking forward to doing over the next days, weeks, months, and years.
Thank you. Now, I know that the vast majority of that work has been done collaboratively, engaging NAFIO and Thurgood Marshall, along with the United Negro College Fund efforts. Mr. Barnes, would you like to add?
So I just wanted to put a finer point on Mr. Murray's comments. Yes, it definitely was a collaborative effort, but we take great pride in not only our collaborative effort as a coalition of HBCU advocacy organizations, but truly our in-house champions in Congress on a bipartisan basis in both chambers. So I'd be remiss, naturally, our queen, Representative Alvin Adams, who's been a champion since day one. She is the founder of the HBCU Bipartisan Caucus. Also, Senator Tim Scott, Senator Cory Booker, and of course, Madam Vice President-elect Harris has been a champion since day one. Representative Mark Walker, whose wife actually is a two-time graduate of Winston-Salem State University. So we have been blessed to have truly bipartisan support, and it should not go unnoticed. We don't have to really preach to, we're basically preaching to the choir. They see our value. And if it's one silver lining in this COVID-19 pandemic, it just helped to amplify the challenges, needs of our HBCU and minority serving institutions, but also our value. So it's a great time to be in this space.
We're very happy to have you in this space. And we're also happy to have our umbrella organization, NAFIO. Clearly, United Negro College Fund works on behalf of our private institutions. Thurgood Marshall College Fund works primarily on behalf of our public institutions. But NAFIO really has an overarching responsibility to advance the agenda for HBCUs. Mr. Taylor, are there other things that you would like to add in terms of what's been happening for the last several years in the HBCU space?
Well, good morning and thank you. There's been quite a few things going on. One of the things that Dr. Baskerville and I have been working on is trying to supplement what's already being done today. The Capital Finance Program is a very successful program, and our goal was to go in and create additional capacity for additional development type projects for both on and off campus. As everyone has stated so far today, our partners in Congress, specifically, I work with Congresswoman Maxine Waters and some of the others on financial services to develop a robust program so that not only are we looking at federal support, but how do we bring the equity markets to the table? So we have been successful in bringing equity funds to the table as well as some other private funds so that we can get a better umbrella of financial products and services to help the HBCUs. Our focus is both on and off campus, to look at creating a new vision for campuses, such as the one we just completed at FAMU, where it creates a new atmosphere of housing and the housing experience. Most students today are coming from different environments than in the past, and there's certain expectations that are set. Our job is to make sure in the community university that we have a totally integrated campus environment through development, real estate services, and financing that keeps it affordable and keeps it working for everyone involved in the process. And more importantly, we're able to bring projects in on time and under budget. One of the big features of the community university program is that we have set up in NAFIO a pass-through borrowing entity that takes the risk and a responsibility off the HBCUs and the PBIs and places it into a special purpose entity that allows for tighter controls and to also supplement staff and staff participation at the university level, and to also make sure that things come in on time and on budget so that we don't have issues. In addition to the real estate services, we're also working with K16, a learning management system platform that we invited most of the HBCUs to this past couple months ago with Wake Forest University, where we're able to bring the transfer of these learning management systems to the HBCUs at a reduced cost. So we're focusing on the technical advancements, the real estate advancements, both on and off campus, and then trying to bring services that will enhance the campus experience. downstream. So we're pleased to participate in today's session and look forward to it.
We're very pleased to have you as well, and thank you for those innovative approaches to solving longstanding problems on the campuses of HBCU relative to real estate. Now, I know that our next panelist, our next guest, Mr. Donald Watson, has a significant interest in ensuring that projects come in on time and under budget because he has been stewarding the HBCU Capital Finance Program, which represents a monumental effort on the part of the federal government to sustain and support institutions as they seek to grow their capacity and expand their physical facilities. Mr. Watson, for those who may not be intimately familiar with capital finance, could you please describe the purposes and goals of the program at its inception, and then we'll talk a little bit about what's been happening with it lately.
Yes, actually the program is very unique, and I say it's unique in a way that it's only offered to HBCUs. It's a program in which we fund and refinance and finance anything except, we would say, religious institutions and I'll do hand quotes here, stadiums. And the purpose of this program is to allow HBCU access to the capital markets. Say, for instance, if an HBCU was to borrow today, they can come in at less than 2% all in for financing. You can't find that anywhere. And I like to sort of brag that HBCUs actually get better rates than Harvard, Yale. I compare our rates to them any day and time, and we will always beat them out. And so I encourage HBCUs to get into this process. And it's not just building parts. When you talk about sustainability, with the refinancing piece is a greater piece of that, because we've also seen times when we refinance debt and we've saved HBCUs tens of millions of dollars over the life of a loan. And so I like to let you know, if you, and don't just think about building buildings. There's infrastructure pieces like we do piping, all kinds of things. So if you think about construction and construction loans, that's where we can be very useful to you. And the firms are a great thing. It's something that is also unique. But that also will provide institutions with a piece of sustainability, because we think about over time that principal interest payments can now be sent to doing other things, increasing your infrastructure for IT, increasing your communication and enrollment strategies. So those things are sustainability and allow you to create new programs, which again will allow you to sustain HBCUs for the long run.
And so just a couple of follow-ups on that. Certainly Mr. Murray articulated the value of the deferments and how excited we were here in the private space to have the benefit of those deferments. And recently those have been expanded to include the public institutions. I assume the thinking behind that obviously is to allow institutions an opportunity to increase their stability, long-term sustainability, and to your point, right, to invest in things beyond the deferment. Other thoughts on the usefulness of the deferment and how it actually works from an operational standpoint?
Yes, so that's very interesting, because most people don't look at it this way, and including the department. There's actually three sets of deferments. There's private deferments, for which there are 18 institutions. There are the public deferments, for which there are 2 institutions. And then there's CARES Act deferments, for which the CARES Act deferment now takes the entire portfolio is in deferment, with the exception of 2 institutions. And those 2 institutions aren't in deferment because one didn't apply at all, and the second institution didn't get approval from its state. But the way it actually works is that the federal government actually makes principal and interest payments, and I have to do them in sort of categories because the public and privates work the same, CARES work a little differently. So for public and privates, the federal government, as long as Congress makes these annual appropriations, the federal government, the principal and interest. So you look at your amortization schedule like any loan, we'll take that principal interest payment and the federal government will pay that. Now there's other things the institution are responsible for paying, like servicing fees. We have another fund called a replacement fund, which allows institutions to keep the real estate up. The institution is responsible for those. Now, let's say, for example, your loan have a repayment term of 20 years. So we'll pay, and you have a 6-year deferment, we'll pay the deferment for that for 6 years. In year 21, you'll start to pay interest. They'll start to pay the principal, and what the Department of Education will do is now give you a new amortization, which will show the principal, and there's a new interest based on that principal payment that we paid. So again, the interest we paid, say for the last 3 years for a private, that's not part of your repayment in the future. CARES Act is a little different because the language in the law is a little different. The CARES Act, the language of the CARES Act says totally different. The principal and the interest is actually paid at the end of the term of the bond. But we did this exact same way. And again, when you think about these interest payments, they're not paying a market rate. They're paying a rate that the federal government will pay on its debt. So again, it's a little different, but the idea is that we're paying the principal interest today for those loans.
So you said something that's really critical, and I want to amplify that for our viewing audience. As long as the appropriations continue to be made to support and sustain that program, we will continue to enjoy the benefit of the deferment. And so when we think about HBCU sustainability and we think about our government agenda, it is critically important that all those who love and support HBCUs really advocate with their elected officials to ensure that the appropriations continue to be made to sustain and support the deferment program for the maximum period of the deferments.
Yes, and that's very unique, and that's very unique in that you made that point, because most people think that you get the deferment and you say, okay, you have it for 6 years. If Congress doesn't make appropriations, we can't make the deferment. And part of that thinking was, if you think about the very first deferment, the amount was for only $10 million. We've only been able to give maybe 1 or 2 deferments, but in that first year, we were able to give 8. And then when Congress came back and said and agreed with that sort of process, that we can get deferments every year as long as they made appropriation, then the first year for privates, we were able to get 13 deferments. For publics, the thinking was sort of the same thing. The Congress would sort of make the same sort of idea. But then the CARES Act came along and actually took care of everybody. But again, you have to think there's 2 distinctions between those, the public and private deferments and the CARES Act deferment. So there's a little difference there. So but Congress have to make appropriations for both.
And part of the purpose of the summit really is to educate everyone on the nuances of these unique programs, as we've articulated, and help us to be effective advocates for things that matter to HBCUs. And so having you here to really talk through that has been a tremendous benefit to those of us who I had not been familiar with the terms of the public deferment, selfishly only concerned with the one afforded to the privates. And so it really helps me to hear the distinctions between the public school deferments and the capital finance, and the CARES Act deferments to be able to advocate effectively for the entire sector.
And the other thing that's very important for this is that for public and private deferments, under continual resolution, we're able to fund your deferment through that continual resolution. CARES Act deferments aren't the same way. And it just so happened the CARES Act, when we actually modeled this for FY20, our model actually took the deferment from past the fiscal year through December. So that's the only reason we're able to give CARES Act for the remainder, for the first quarter of the fiscal year. If Congress does not give more money for this continual resolution, we won't be able to fund the CARES Act after December 1st.
So, and that is a critical point on which I think it's probably appropriate to shift gears, and that is, what can we expect? We have had an election, an unusual election to say the least, which may or may not be completely over, but we're still in the throes of that. And so government is operating under a continuing resolution. There are significant implications of that for our nation's HBCUs, but we have quite a number of other initiatives that we'll be pursuing as we move into this next administration. And so I'd like to start, Mr. Burns, with you. What can we expect? To what extent has the election impacted the HBCU agenda?
Well, to be quite honest with you, I think because we have enjoyed bipartisan support, I see it even actually remaining the same, but also getting better, so to speak, because we have Madam Vice President-elect Harris as Vice President and HBCU graduate, and she has been one of our champions since day one entering the Senate. So honestly, I just see things getting better, if not just leveling off, but I really see it getting better, and particularly in light of, I imagine COVID-19 pandemic will still be going on. As I said earlier, it has only just amplified the challenges that our institutions face. Got
it. Mr. Taylor, thoughts on that? Has the election impacted the agenda for NAFIO?
I don't think it really impacted the agenda. I think it's really helping it to become a little bit more focused. And one of the things we're looking at under the Communiversity program is the fact that you've got a lot of debt that's going to be wrapped up within the federal government dealing with the pandemic. And one of the things that's going to happen, which typically happens in most of the time we have things like this, there's going to be extreme budget cuts. So we're working today to get out in front of that, so that the work that Don does with his group is very, 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 very important. And then try to come alongside of that and bring in private dollars, private resources to the table that's not been made available to historical Black colleges and universities. So we've been very successful with equity markets. We've been very successful with financial institutions who, because of the emphasis on the whole unrest in the country, they have a desire to put dollars into a program. One of the areas that we're trying to focus on to get out in front of it is developing the biggest thing that most HBCUs need before they even go see Don or any of his people is pre-development dollars. Because if you don't have pre-development dollars, you can't plan, you can't get out in front of the development process to make sure that the thing works. And you don't want to bring something into to Don's group that's not we call fully baked. Then you're fighting time, efforts, and it's wasting a lot of resources. So we're focusing on, through the Communiversity programs, bringing the development management program to focus on pre-development, and in that focus also fund off balance sheet, so that we're able to come through and get the universities in a position where they can move forward. And then once you move forward, then what are the funding stacks that you can bring in to deal with both the on-campus and the off-campuses? And one of the things Don talked about was stadiums. We're getting a lot of calls for stadiums. And we're looking at stadiums right now. We've had the benefit of working with some of the more established NFL foundations who want to participate, and making sure universities understand that if you're going to build a $100 million stadium, you can't support $100 million worth of debt. But the goal is to buy down that debt obligation to a serviceable number through the tools that they use today in building stadiums and arenas across this country. So those are the things we're trying to do to work alongside these giants to make sure that we can bring private capital to the table, and to also structure it so that the universities are not strained and stressed through the process, and really put our hands around it to make sure that things run smoothly.
We certainly appreciate that. So, Mr. Murray, has the election altered your agenda in any way on behalf of the United Negro College Fund?
Yes. And I think that the biggest way, I think the things that we're working on haven't been altered. I think that agenda is set. I think that we have a greater opportunity for accountability after this election. We've seen African-American voters move and shift lines and switch states over from one color to the next. I think the next level in our advocacy is not just voting every 2 or 4 years, but keeping those that are viewing today's program engaged over that time period, so that they are actively asking legislators and actively asking the administration for what we want at just the right time to get the right results. And I think that that's something that could be our next step to take our advocacy, which has been successful over the last few years, to the next level, to make sure that there's accountability both in Congress, where the laws are getting passed, and in the White House, where the laws are being signed and actually executed.
Now, along those lines, Mr. Watson, you have worked in multiple administrations, Democrat and Republican, over time. Do you anticipate the election having any impact on the programs that you lead for the Department of Education? And if so, what do you expect?
I do not expect any significant impact. But what I am expecting, and it's sort of for my colleagues who I work with, UCF, Thurgood Marshall, and NAFIO, is that you continue the partnership and don't lose the partnership that you had with the current administration as the administration go forward. That's the key. We're your partners, not necessarily. I learned this from FSA when I used to write Title IV policy years ago. When FSA first became a PBO, we looked at institutions not only as customers, but as partners. And that's the same thing we're looking at you all here. So in order to keep us on task, because anyone who's actually working with me know, I'll say, if it's in the red book, I can do it. If it's not, so I can get through it without breaking the law, I can do it. But I can only do that if we're partners. So that's how a lot of things get done. A lot of things that we're doing is getting done because we're actually working as partners. So keep that partnership focus as part of your agenda, not just with the administration, but with the Congress as well.
Mm-hmm. I think that's incredibly helpful advice, and certainly want to pause and just say thank you publicly. I can attest to that, that your office has really partnered with us and corrected us when necessary, given us good advice and guidance. And so for those who are watching that have not had a chance perhaps to engage the office, I would urge you to do that. Your questions will be answered, and the guidance is generally quite good, and they will not steer you wrong. So thank you for your collaborative approach, and thank each of you, gentlemen. We're not done by a long shot, but I do want to acknowledge the three of you, because nothing happens without collaboration and partnership, and the Herculean efforts that have been made in recent years on a collaborative agenda between these three organizations that all have a shared mission and goal of advocating for HBCUs has been nothing short of remarkable. So thank you, public, private, and umbrella. We appreciate all of you. Shifting a little more deeply into where we go from here. All three of you have indicated, all four of you potentially have indicated that you don't see significant changes. So let's dive in. What is the agenda? Mr. Burns, what is the agenda for our public institutions as we move into this administration?
Well, absolutely. As Rodriguez just mentioned, accountability, first and foremost. And the 116th Congress still has a few more days left. So we want, so first and foremost, prior to in this lame duck session, before the 116th Congress expires, we want to get the HBCU partners asked across the finish line. As you may recall, in President Trump's executive order, there's a requirement for each department and agency to create an agency plan to document their specific engagement with HBCUs. The HBCU Partners Act actually codifies that requirement. So no matter who's in office or who's our president, that accountability will remain in place. So the HBCU Partners Act, one version, the Senate version, actually passed February 2019 by unanimous consent, which is a testament to the bipartisan support that we enjoy. Nothing these days passes by unanimous consent in the Senate. And so that's a testament to our collective advocacy. And so we have until the expiration of this Congress to get it through the finish line. So we look like we're in good shape to do it. We're in the final stages. We have the agreement, so to speak. We've agreed on the language. It's just a matter of getting all parties on board and having it passed by unanimous consent in the Senate and by voice vote in the Senate and voice vote in the House of Representatives. And for the 117th Congress, especially in light of, like I said, during this COVID-19 pandemic, it really amplified our challenges and our value. So, and particularly, we want to set aside $10 billion for infrastructure. As you all well know, that COVID-19 highlighted the vast disparity within our member schools with respect to the digital divide and distance learning. So that $10 billion investment will help resource our libraries, make sure we have the state-of-the-art labs, and also, more importantly, we're talking about sustainability. So that way our institutions can actually compete and receive vital government contracts and grants for research and development. So that's their sustainability piece. That's what we have our eyes on the prize, so to speak. So that's very important to our agenda. And also with respect to, we want to advocate for $6.5 billion annually for research and development. For instance, in 2018, all institutions of higher education received $79 billion. $42 billion were from the federal government alone. Yet HBCUs received $534 million and $400 million were from the federal government. So in this climate, we really want to take advantage of it and get our fair share, so to speak. So that's a very important part of our agenda. And then next, we want to focus on Department of Education, Department of Agriculture, and Department of Defense as well. And specifically with respect to our ask with the Department of Education is doubling the Pell Grant. We all know that 30% of, today, 30% Pell Grants only cover 30% of costs for our member schools. Yet 40 years ago it was 79%. So that's very important to make sure our students not only enter college, access college, but actually graduate. So that's a very important agenda item for us with respect to the Department of Education. And also create a technology fund. Again, COVID-19 shined a light on that need for broadband access. So that's a very big part of our agenda with respect to the Department of Education. And then sometimes, you just don't want to throw money at the problem, because we've encountered with our Republican colleagues, the first thing they'll ask is how are you going to pay for it? Right. So one of the things we were able to get with the CARES Act are waivers, and with respect to canceling the HBCU capital finance debt. That's a big proponent. The Senate Democrats have put that provision in the Economic Justice Act. Our Queen, Alma Adams, has a bill, Capital Finance Relief Act. That's one thing we definitely want to champion in the 117th Congress. With respect to the Department of Agriculture, our schools, the Thurgood Marshall College Schools, we have 18 land grant schools, the 1800s, so to speak. $50 million was funded for 1890 Centers of Excellence. $50 million. Yet last year, only $6 million was appropriated. So we're going to continue to advocate to make sure we get our equal share, our fair share, so to speak. And also with respect to the Farm Bill, they established 1890 scholarships. Last year, the Congress appropriated $1 million for each land grant institution. That last year, each school only received $750,000. So we're going to advocate for full funding of that. And then finally, with respect to the Department of Defense, which is the big moneymaker, so to speak, for us in our space. So we want to make sure, again, we're receiving our fair share. So we work very closely with Congressman Anthony Brown, who was actually my former boss when he was Lieutenant Governor of Maryland. We passed a law with respect to requiring the National Academy of Sciences to create a study to really analyze how the Department of Defense is actually engaging with HBCUs. That study is due next year. So we're going to take that study, take the results, and use that as a baseline to see, okay, and then have legislation that Anthony Brown intends to sponsor that requires the Department of Defense to actually engage with us. So those are like the hallmarks, the big high-level points that we're focused on, which is a very robust agenda. And I wanted to say, I want to thank Rodriguez and Nafio, Madam President Baskerville. Each and every year, we come together and put together a chart. Congressman Danny Davis takes the lead on behalf of the Black Caucus to really marshaling on our collective agenda as a community through each Congress. So we can continue to work as a community. We have the momentum. We're going to keep it going, and we're going to definitely hold not only the administration, which I don't see that's a problem in this new administration, but definitely Congress. And like I said, we've had bipartisan support throughout the years to hold them accountable and make sure the momentum is going.
Thank you. You're correct. That is a very robust agenda. And specifically as it relates to your land grants, which obviously is a distinguishing feature for the most part between our publics and our private institutions, as well as some of the larger research issues. I have one follow-up question, and it is, to what do you attribute the difference between dollars allocated and dollars actually awarded? What have been the barriers to accessing those dollars, if you know?
I would say pay for us. Our Republican champions, that's the first and foremost. You have to identify how you're going to pay for it. So that's the major barrier, so to speak, for us, and just a willingness to do it, to really find the money. Because naturally, if you have a will to do it, you'll find the money to do it. So we just making sure we beat that drum for the sport, so to speak, with all our advocates, in-house champions on both sides of the aisle and both chambers.
Well, and I think that's a really important point to amplify again for our viewing audience. When you say, $50 million was allocated, but $6 million was awarded, most people would attribute that to, well, the HBCUs didn't go get it, right? The HBCUs did not get aggressive in going to get that money. And that's the reason I asked the follow-up question, because I don't want to leave anyone with the impression that it was a lack of action or desire on the part of the HBCU community that resulted in those dollars not being awarded and allocated effectively.
Absolutely. That's what we get paid to do. So,
As do we.
Well, Dr. Artis,
I was coming to you next.
Can I piggyback a little bit here?
Floor.
I appreciate it. But I want to make sure that there's a mindset. The agenda that Sean laid out is the right one. But there's one particular point I want to make sure that we don't lull ourselves into. Sean said that he doesn't think that there will be a problem with the administration. I think that we need to go in looking for them to show us in action that there's no problem with the administration. It's fine for us to be excited about the outcome of the election. It's fine for there to be jubilation, but we should wait on action and resources to show that folks are serious about our agenda. You look at us, last time this election was held, we were nowhere to be found at the RNC and the DNC. You look a couple months ago, both campaigns are putting us front and center, and they're using us to appeal to voters. We worked for them during the election. Now it's time for them to show us that they will work for us. And that's not going to be in words spoken. It's going to be in deeds done, in laws passed, and resources. HBCUs aren't void of anything except structural resources over time. And only the awarding of appropriations, of funds, of grants will help make up for that. So we shouldn't just be excited about an outcome, and we shouldn't just expect that folks will do what we. There are going to be a lot of competing interests, and we've been down this road before, where we've just been excited about outcomes, and excited about the outcome of an election, and haven't gotten all the results that were due to us. And so we should be cautioned by the recent past, and we should approach a new administration and a new Congress with expectation and engagement to get good outcomes.
I think that's a really important point. And sort of a follow-up to that is, and what about Congress? Right? So, White House is only as good at, we have a legislative system that requires a little check and balance, right? That requires multiple levels of approval. For either of you, any of the panelists, what is the impact of our yet to be determined Senate?
Well, you're right. It's all about the Congress. And folks often take the executive branch, think whoever the president is, and that's the big deal. It is all about the Congress. It's all about the makeup of the Congress. And because we cannot decide which side is going to be in the majority in the Senate by ourselves, most of us, none of us possibly live in the state of Georgia anymore. And that's why it's been so important. And you've heard Sean say it, you've heard myself say it, and you've heard Don hint at it, that you need to have bipartisan support in both chambers of the Congress. That's what we've been successful in doing for 3 years. That's the only reason why HBCU items have been passing the Senate on unanimous consent. That meant all 100 senators were okay with the Future Act. That meant all 100 senators were all okay with the HBCU Partners Bill and with other items that we've worked on. We just need to continue to have strong bipartisan relationships. So no matter the outcome in Georgia, no matter the outcome in any House or any Senate campaign, that our agenda continues to move forward and that we have a realistic shot. The Congress is really all of it. I think sometimes we close out looking too much to the presidency when their part is really all the way at the end at the signing and the execution. But the Congress has about 90% of the whole federal process in its wheelhouse.
And so I think you've teased out, the two of you have teased out a couple of really important themes. The first is accountability, right? A lot of promises are made during an election cycle, but holding our elected officials accountable to fulfill those promises really needs to be at the top of the HBCU agenda. And the second is never, ever to underestimate the value of friends on both sides of the aisle. There is no question that the deferment legislation, that the Future Act, all of those gains that the HBCU community made resulted from both parties coming together and supporting HBCUs. And so I think regardless, to Mr. Murray's point, regardless of what happens in Georgia, our agenda remains the same. And advocates can come from anywhere. It is important that everyone be educated as to the issues that impact HBCUs across this country. Paul, thoughts on that? Oh, I'm sorry.
Let me put a finer point on that. The reason for my optimism is not necessarily because of President Biden and Vice President Harris's election, but more importantly, past his prologue by their recent actions. For instance, every iteration of COVID-19 relief bill, whether it's the HEROES Act or Mitch McConnell's skinny budget, there has always been a provision for HBCUs. And that just didn't happen because out of the kindness in their heart. It's because of our collective efforts. So that's the reason for my optimism. And it's not, again, because of their kindness of their heart. It's because we've been holding them accountable. We've been beating them down, even during COVID, because of our relationships.
So lifting them up. Lifting them
because of our relationships, we've been able to get it done, even during this pandemic, doing Zoom calls and phone calls. And again, I want to also give a shout out to Senator Doug Jones, outgoing Senator Doug Jones. So he's been one of our champions as well, and it's a big loss for us.
Thank you. Paul,
in addition to Doug Jones leaving, I think it's important to note that Kamala Harris, who's been his constant partner, she's going to move into a different role. She was effective as a legislator, and not saying that she will be effective as a vice president, but we're losing the presence of the only active HBCU graduate in the Senate. In addition to Doug Jones being the only, the biggest champion in the Deep South, you're losing Senator Harris in her current role. And so there's going to be some more cultivation needed. We do have Cory Booker. He's the son of 2 HBCU graduates. And we have Tim Scott, who has 8 of them in his state and has really stepped up over the last few years. But we're going to need to cultivate new champions. And so that's going to be part of what you're going to see over the next couple of years.
I was going to hold out for a second because every time I say Paul, somebody else starts talking. So I was going to wait a couple seconds to see. Paul Taylor, jump into this conversation. What are you thinking?
No problem. I think the couple of things. One, speaking to what Sean talked about as far as research, what we've done is try to review and look at what are the hurdles on the typical HBCU campus today. What are these hurdles? And I spoke about it earlier, one of which is pre-development funding. Both gentlemen are talking about accountability. And what happens if you don't have the proper pre-development budgets before you go into any construction project, you don't have it tied down. And then what happens, then they look to Don's group to try to, bend a rule, make a rule go. And I'm with him on that. If it's not in the reg book, we can't make it work. And the goal is to try to work with the universities and educate them on what is true pre-development to make sure when a project does move forward, it is financeable. And if it's not, where are the holes before you go and bring the capital stack to the table? So that's one of the main tenets of where we're going to try to push that education throughout the HBCUs. The other thing is, as you look at a lot of the campuses today, and the COVID-19 really brought this emphasis on, where you really have adequate housing stock that can deal with the issues of transmittable issues within the campuses. And what does that mean? That means, again, more developed, more building, and that has an impact on where the schools go and bringing their inventory up to speed on a competitive nature with some of the other schools that are doing that. So we're looking at that. The other component, when you start talking about research and development is so key. And right now, most of the campuses do not have a full research capability other than the technical pieces, and I mean capability from facilities. So we're working with a couple of the HBCUs right now to actually develop research parks, which allows for research partners to come in to work alongside of that to help support and underpin these efforts for grants and other dollars, because those things are critical to the development of schools. Last point, when you start talking about the agenda going forward, there's going to be an emphasis on both sides of the House and the Senate to show how does the private side, how do you become less reliant on government dollars and more reliant on a true open market platform, even though that's not an even playing field. We have tried to develop and bring these resources in, so we don't look at it either or of what a CAT finance program is. It's a both, because you got to use both. If you really look at the needs on these HBCU campuses today, there's just not enough money today if you covered all the people's needs. So our goal is to make sure that as the new Congress comes on board, that we're showing them a new model, that there's accountability, so that when the gentlemen are working to deal with their efforts, it's that no, we're not going to have the problems of the past. We're going to bring new, sustainable, measurable outcomes that you can rely on, and then try to get the proper resources in place so that where you do get state governments, and I don't want this to pass up, I heard Don very clearly, one state government wouldn't sign off on the issue. And the goal is to make sure that we're positioning programs so that it's very difficult for them to turn them down. You've got to be able to get the universities up to speed from real estate development, technical assistance, and technical interfaces, and that's what we're focusing on.
So that causes me to go to another sort of follow-up, and that is those who know me know I am a fan of honest family conversations. When we're good, I'm bragging about it, and when we're bad, I'm going to admit it. I think it's important that we need to be better, always striving to be better. And so, Mr. Watson, you've worked with a lot of us over a lot of years in multiple programs. What can we do better to position ourselves optimally for success into this administration?
It's probably nothing that I haven't said to any of you before. I think part of it, Title III is a great program, and I love the fact that we're getting more money in Title III. I just think that Title III should be focused a little differently. I used to have this idea when I was director of Title III. I called the sort of 30 program, which means that you have 20% of your Title III dollars should be invested in endowment. No matter what happens, that endowment is going to help you flow a little better. When I was the director, a couple of schools did take that advice, and they saw the endowments grow from $1 million to over $7 million in a short period of time. So I think that's one of the great things you can do. Another piece is to actually now think about how you can actually create programs, and not look at Title III to fund these programs in perpetuity, but to fund these programs as seed money. And like any of it, you start to invest in it, and as it builds up, you have less grant money, and now it starts to fund itself. And so I think that's one thing. So we need to look at program audits, see what programs are actually making money. I'm a graduate of UDC, and I got my BA from UDC and in finance. I met with some of my colleagues who got BA degrees in finance. They were upset because there are no finance degree programs at UDC anymore. And I said, we can't blame the president. That's our fault. We didn't recruit for that. And I applaud him because we weren't making money. So I think we need to continue that sort of idea. The other thing is sort of to look at how you can not just fund infrastructure through Cal Finance. If I was out of business in Cal Finance, that'd be a great thing, because that means all your funding is coming through grants or endowment or some other fund, which you don't have to have an outlay of cash. And so that's the other piece. Focus a little more on how you can sort of use this money to shore up your infrastructure. As I said, it can have a replacement reserve fund, but that is nowhere near enough to make sure your infrastructure stays up to par. And when I say infrastructure, not just buildings, but think about technology, because that technology piece is going to be the piece that strands you and move you along. There are some schools out there who are coming late to the program for online learning. But I always ask that question, what to do for your online learning? Because, you think about the housing situation, what happened in COVID, and where we are now in COVID. Schools that have large online presence before this, they're not going to see the same hit that on-campus schools saw, because that infrastructure was in place. So think of that sort of thing. The other thing I like to say is that, and I'm not sure how to get rid of this, but with all the schools I made loans to, there's probably 2 schools that have the same president that signed the loan. Now, I'm not sure how to get beyond that.
I think we pass a law. I feel like we need to get bipartisan support for stabilizing the presidency.
and Dr. Artisan, I mean, you know, you know, you're laughing, but sometimes when you're making a transaction, it's like, how long are you going to be here? Because it's your idea and it's how you're running the institution, and that for of your leadership that's also impacting that financial decision. So you may make the nerve stay, but I've also made loans to schools who we save money. Everything's going great. The president leaves, and then there's a 360, right? And part of that is boards, right? So board leadership. Again, those are things that I think I sort of need shore up, and those are my heavy pieces. You know, and you know, I've said it to Sean and others from the state side. There are states out there who prohibit HBCUs from coming through the program. Why not allow an institution to make the best business decision for the institution, right? And now time, and I used to go out and I used to say, well, no, I don't know and hide it, but GAO always hit me for it because I'm not doing the work. Now I have to say it's not me. Here are the results. This is what Emma, which is a sort of place where it shows who makes bond deals publicly. This is what they did on Emma, and this is where they was when they were talking to me. And so, kind of thing I think I need us to see where we're actually constantly making those best decisions for the institution, and showing up that leadership is part of it. But again, that Title III funding, and not just the Department of Education. I mean, when you look at the Department of Education, we're probably, I like to say we are a good partner, but others have to do the same thing. You know, you talk about defense, other agencies. The White House Initiative was created for those other agencies to have that kind of input, but they need to bring those grant dollars to the table because, as I said, the greatest thing for me to happen is to say, Don Watson, there's no more need for you to have CAP finance program. And I'm like, hey, then that means money flowing. You all are financing things on your own. And so I think that's sort of the thing. But again, you know, endowment, infrastructure, leadership, and focus on how your program is making you money.
Thank you. So to all our presidents out there, our roadmap, and for the government affairs gentlemen who are on the line, how can we help you? What can we do to support you? What can we do to assist with developing the strongest possible case on behalf of HBCUs? And I'm not going to even pick anyone. I'm just going to let someone jump in on that one.
I'd like to start off. I think, thanks, Mr. Burns. I'd like to say that we should speak with one voice. I understand that presidents are charged with looking out for their individual institution, for better or for worse. Many of us have the same problems, and we're going to rise and fall together. Let's use a very practical example. If institutions want to make situations better for any debt that they carry, no one institution is going to be absolved of debt alone. And so the institutions need to walk and talk together, be all on the same accord and advocate for the same policies. That's the reason for the various umbrella organizations you see on the line today to help speak with that one large voice. And we have shown the propensity to be able to work together as colleagues all here on the line. And if we can work together, it's incumbent upon the presidents that we represent to work with us and allow us to speak with that one voice. In addition to that, we must be engaged. Presidents and institution leaders must be engaged when we need them. Advocacy is not just saying what you want when you want it. It's saying the right things at the right time when they can be most effective. And so that timing of the message is just as important as what you say. And I think that we're the experts on knowing when to say it and what to say. And so if the presidents and other institutional leaders will respond at just that right time with the right message to the right people, that's when we optimize our results. It's a little bit of science. It's a little bit of art. But I don't think that you can argue with the results over the last few years that the folks that have been engaged with you in this line of work have had a modicum of success.
So what I've heard is do what you say.
You heard that we need to be disciplined, and discipline will help us get results.
Yeah. And I make light, but I'm sincere. I mean, I think the comment really was, when we need you and we call you, please answer timely, please be efficient and respond. Right.
And I know I'm not a government affairs official, but I just want to chime in. And I totally agree with Rodriguez, because when I first took over capital finance about 12 years ago, the first thing I did was rewrote the statute. And deferments were in that statute. Nobody even knows this, but deferments have been in that statute. Reduced interest rates in that statute. There's other things in that statute, and it's taken a long time for it to come. But I've been steadfast on that, and as the opportunity and time comes, it's able to present itself, and now the entire portfolio is in deferment. And so it's things like that. You have to stay fast and have that idea and make sure you move with it as it goes forward. So
I think there's dual conversations here, though. I think there is a moment in time when the iron is hot and we have to be responsive and react quickly. But there's also something to be said for the long game, right? 12 years, right? Continuing to move the needle. It's a game of inches till we get to the goalpost, right? So I think there is a blend here of short and long game strategy that can best serve historically Black colleges. And the turnover probably does challenge the long game, right? Because you lose things in that conversion. No different probably than the White House when it changes and or Congress. Sean, you want to jump in on this?
Right. And one thing I want to add is the importance of not only presidents and chancellors, but our Title III administrators reaching out to us to share their success stories. Because I think of our requests to Congress, these are actual investments. So anytime you're asking folks for money, the first thing that comes to mind is, what's the return on their investment? So we want to hear your stories. We want to hear these narratives. So when we, Rodriguez and I, and Madam President Baskerville, when we go advocate before members of Congress and their staff, particularly to educate the staff, like, these are the returns on the investment. We want to hear these, let them know the success stories. Like, send them an email. Hey, this is what happened at FAMU. The new dorm was just erected. Thank you for your support. Because nobody wants to hear from people only when you want something. We want to just continue that dialogue, continue that relationship. Thank you, thank you, thank you. This is what we've done with your investment, and this is a true return on investment, and this is our value.
Don't just call your grandma the day before your birthday.
Exactly.
Right. Stay in touch with your grandma and let her know how you're doing in school, right? I think that, some very practical things we learn, right, in our culture and in our community really have equal applicability here. And I think you also hit on something that's really important, and it was one of the topics we addressed in the first HBCU Sustainability Summit, and that was really around our narrative, telling the positive stories. What have we accomplished and what have we achieved? And are we doing that show and tell? And generally speaking, most of us, and I will speak really for the under-resourced presidents in the House, you just don't have enough hours in the day to both do the work and then amplify the work. And so we've got to be a little more intentional about sharing those stories with you gentlemen who are in a position to give voice to those stories and advocate on our behalf, because results matter. Right. When people don't see the results, those that ask get, those that thank get more. And so I think it's important that we all go back to those principles we learned just as children, right, in our communities on how to get things done. Paul, did you have anything to add here? I don't want to keep you out of this conversation.
No, I think you're, and Sean covered it well. Dr. Baskerville works well with the with all the collaborators, and the goal is to make sure that you keep a constant message. You just can't have mixed messages. And what I do inside the Binoculio wagon is to deal with all of the naysayers that Sean, Rodriguez, and everyone deals with today, is how do you prove it different? How do you prove a different outcome? And until you have successes, they have to have things they can rely on to say, oh no, this is how it's done right. This is how it's being done right today. And this is how we move the ball forward. And see, that's the piece we're bringing forward in Communiversity, is to take all of these lessons learned, these practices, and then try to underpin a best outcome. And then work with the university presidents and with the multiple boards, because he's so true. You get boards, you get board of directors, you get state boards, you get everybody else at the end of the day. But how do you bridge that to show them? And one thing that always bridges any board is success. If you have success, you can then bring a different narrative to the table. And that's what we tried to do. So I think the key is to not everybody needs to play in the same lane. You need to focus in your lane of what you do. Let the advocacy groups handle the advocacies, and we have a stay on our side. We keep our nose to the pavement so that we can keep the outcomes coming, and then make sure I never get a call from a Don if he's financing a project, whatever. How do we bring the positives so we're using positive energy for more brainstorming and more processing going forward? Because the environment on campuses is changing every day, and if we're not competitive, we're not going to grow. So we have to be competitive.
And so I think you tease out another theme, and that is obviously the importance of outcomes, and want to publicly again acknowledge UNCF in terms of the economic impact. I cannot tell you how many times I have quoted that study, and it included, of course, public and private institutions. I have quoted that study to demonstrate and document the value of Benedict College, of the 8 HBCUs in the state of South Carolina, as we deal with the state General Assembly and the governor's office. The economic impact that these relatively small institutions make on a state like South Carolina really speaks volumes. And so having analytical work, having data, having good documentation of our actual impact, our output in terms of workforce development, our output in terms of economic impact are incredibly, incredibly important. And so appreciate UNCF. I don't know, tag your Thurgood or Nafio on the next production in terms of our outcomes data.
Well, Dr. Artis, I'm glad that you brought up the economic impact study, because, and Sean, you can help me if I'm wrong, but I've seen the economic impact study help open doors with legislators who did not previously give us an audience. So, and let's just go ahead and be frank. Democrats were fine with the anecdotal stories of what HBCUs were able to accomplish. They were okay with that. When we went to Republican offices, they wanted data. They wanted proof. And the economic impact study explained the campuses in a completely different narrative. It explained how many jobs are supported by each campus. It showcased that there are various states where HBCUs collectively have over $1 billion of economic impact per year. And it showed collectively that we hire and fire like a Fortune 50 company. That was a completely different narrative than some Republican senators and congressmen have ever heard about HBCUs. They saw us in a different light. They saw us as economic engines that they could not let go out of business. They saw us, in another phraseology, as too big to fail. And so they supported us in a different way because we brought the narrative to them in a different way. And I really think that, along with the CBC and Alma Adams and her bipartisan caucus, along with, for the first time, having 3 Black senators, along with Doug Jones in the Deep South, I think those 4 elements, and then you add that our ability to work together, those 4 or 5 elements are the foundation for the success that you've seen over the last 3 years. But I don't think that we would be where we are if you remove any of those 4 or 5 elements, including that economic impact study.
Everything matters. Before we get ready to move to sort of our Q&A portion, and I invite our audience to begin placing your questions, comments in the chat so that we can address our panelists with those, your questions. We've, I think, had a robust conversation around the gains that have been made, reasons for those gains, where we're going from here, and what the HBCU agenda looks like for the next Congress and the next White House, and ultimately what we can do to help advance that agenda. But certainly we have perhaps left some stones unturned. So we invite our listening audience, our viewing audience, to please make your presence known, ask your questions. You have 4 gentlemen who have been at the forefront of the struggle, not just in the last 3 years, but who have long game been involved in advocacy for HBCUs, some quietly, some very publicly, but all equally important in the advancement of historically Black colleges and their agendas over the last decade, several decades, quite frankly. Sean, you look like maybe you were going to respond to something Ladriga said earlier. And so
Yeah,
I just wanted to invite the audience to get ready for questions.
Right, I just wanted to piggyback on Ladriga, and I commend UNCF for commissioning a report. Black Lives Matter, data matters. So data doesn't lie, my old boss we used to say. So it's definitely important to help tell our story, particularly with the Republican side of the aisle, like I mentioned before. One of the two things that they always emphasize, show us the proof and also how you're going to pay for it. So, and it helped to amplify our value and our impact. So thanks again for doing that to help us tell our story and our value.
So I'm curious, as we wait for our audience to decide if they want to ask questions or if we've been so robust and thorough that there may not be any. But I'm curious from your standpoint, you said, you invoked the phrase Black Lives Matter. And that phrase has been received in multiple ways across this country, right? Some view it as a rallying cry and an acknowledgement of the importance of the lives of African Americans in this country. Others view it as divisive and seeming to suggest that Black Lives Matter more than someone else, which certainly I don't believe was the intent. What has been the impact of the racial unrest we've experienced beginning this summer and perhaps even prior to that, but that really erupted this summer during COVID-19 on our ability to advance an agenda on behalf of Black America and or historically Black colleges? Or did it have no impact at all in your view? Anyone?
I think it definitely had an impact. Helped to, again, amplify our challenges and also our value. And also to see the disparity with respect to even health, the value of our institutions to be able to even conduct research to find a cure for COVID-19. And also see how we're underfunded at the federal level. I mentioned before, we're being authorized at one level, but actually appropriate another level. So it just helped to amplify the disparities that exist in our community and the great need to actually do more, whether it's government and the private sector. And we receive substantial gifts from major corporations in light of it. And, Ruth Simmons said it best, we just don't want to see a check. We want to see real investment in our schools and our students and to help them prepare them for the workforce, not just a job, but a great career. And that we have a lot of value to add to the society and nationally, but globally.
So I think I agree with you in terms of Ruth Simmons' assessment of what an investment looks like. That $10 million she just got wasn't a bad one. Congratulations to the Prairie View family on securing a $10 million gift recently. And we have certainly seen successes. And we'll be discussing in our third panel today with a number of corporate heads who have made those kinds of investments in HBCUs, what that means. Are these short-term, we feel terrible about what's been happening investments, or are these long-term sustainable partnerships with historically Black colleges? And that's really what we want to do. And I think the discussion today, at least from the political standpoint, really suggests that long-term deep relationships with our elected officials on both sides of the aisle, with department heads in the Department of Education and Defense and other places, where we have really strong symbiotic, mutually beneficial partnerships, and where the outcomes really are the conversation. We certainly all have experienced anecdotally the value of HBCUs. But when you actually see the productivity of HBCUs in comparison to the relatively minuscule investments that have been made over time in these institutions, I think that it tells a very compelling story. Others have comments on that.
Sure. Dr. Artis, I think that Sean is right that we've seen investments on a philanthropic level. When the first COVID bill passed in late March, we had not yet learned the disparities. We'd not yet learned the disproportionate impact that this disease has had on African Americans, health-wise, economically, and otherwise. So since we've learned that Congress has tried to pass bills, they've been unsuccessful in passing the second stimulus. So far, philanthropic leaders have been able to respond to those disparities and the twindemics that we're experiencing, both COVID and racial unrest, Congress has yet to be able to respond. And that's what we're waiting on. We've seen philanthropy step up, recognize what's happening to us in a unique way. Congress has not been able to ready themselves to actually respond to that. And so we need to keep that in mind. They need to showcase that Black Lives Matter. And the only way to do that is not through speeches, it's through resources, and it's through investment and making sure that we have some structural investments. And so we need to really make sure over the next few weeks, either in the lame duck or the beginning of the 117th Congress, that this Congress actually responds with resources that show us that Black Lives Matter, not just by speeches on the floor.
And so, the audience is silent at this point in terms of questions. It's just giving me all sorts of opportunity to pick the brains of these gentlemen today and to begin to ask questions that are totally off script. So I'm curious. So as we think about a lame duck session and we think about the next Congress, and we also talk about the next potential relief bill, if you had to bet, and we will not hold you to it, but bill gets passed in the lame duck, or are we looking at a post-inauguration?
Go ahead, Sean. I'll follow you.
That's
rather
and
challenging.
you can take the fifth if you want to. I don't want to put you on the spot. You're our advocates. We don't compromise in any way.
Well, it's rather challenging whether it gets to the lame duck, because I know, Speaker Pelosi, and rightfully so, is pushing for funding for our state and local governments. What actually has an impact on us, because at least for our schools, because we are state funded. Mm-hmm. So, if, they don't have money to pay their fire and police, trash pickup, we're going to get cut. So that impacts us. So that provision for state and local government appropriations in the next COVID relief bill is very important. So I don't know how that's really going to play out. Leader McConnell mentioned, another skinny bill. That's pretty much he's dug his feet in the sand, so to speak, on that. I'm honestly not very optimistic it'll get done this lame duck because of the sticking point with respect to state and local funding. And we'll just see. It's almost like a game of chicken, so to speak. But people are really suffering. So I can't really roll the dice on that one. We'll just see who's going to blink first, so to speak. But I'm confident something will pass in the next Congress. We just won't have any choice. You're seeing the spike in COVID-19 cases. People are, unemployed. They're losing their homes. People are really suffering, and voters spoke resoundingly during this last election. So we'll see what happens.
Mr. Murray.
Sure. I think that it's incumbent that Congress passes some form of relief. Like Sean, I'm just not sure if it's going to be in the lame duck or if it's going to be in the new session. But I think as the cases continue to mount and we see them on a daily basis, that Congress is going to have to move, and it's going to have to bring our leaders closer together. But I think that the one thing that we can take solace in is whether it's been a skinny Republican bill or it's been a comprehensive bill in either the House or Senate, an HBCU related set aside has been achieved in every single version. And in addition to that, they have to pass the regular appropriations at some point. And in both the House passed appropriations, there are strong funding levels for our schools, including the regular, the pre-CARES Act deferments are funded in the House passed bill. In the Senate bill that was released just 2 days ago, those same items are included. And so we just need to make sure that we're vigilant on the issues that are important to us. And no matter the timing of their passage, whether it's in December, January, or February, that we continue to apply the pressure, speak with one voice, and let our leaders know what we want to see from them and hold them accountable, because they want to say HBCU all the time. To be able to say that you're supporting HBCUs, you have to have actions that support your words.
Again, teasing out a couple of things, right? Walk the walk. I think if we have a takeaway from Mr. Murray today, it is no talk, Let's walk. We want to see some of those things come to fruition in the next Congress, in the next cycle. And I think certainly we've talked a lot about telling our story. There is a question from one of our guests here. What opportunities are there to support the sustainability of HBCUs through research, such as the important economic impact study that was mentioned previously? So what role can HBCUs and or faculty and advocates play in the next step in terms of telling the story?
Well, I would say as presidents and chancellors, reach out to, and Title III administrators, reach out to your senators, members of Congress, and staff. I mean, to let them know the importance. We're advocating for that $10 billion for infrastructure and that $6.5 billion from our national institutions, like the National Science Foundation, to amplify the disparity that exists and much needed funds to help our schools to remain viable and sustainable.
Thank you for that.
Title III Administrators Group used to publish a book of their accomplishments of all institutions. So I'm not sure if they're still doing that, but I would encourage them to continue to do that and to share that not only with people on this panel, but with members of Congress as well, because it does tell a great story. It's not just as if Title III money is sitting there, but it's great projects and how those projects will help sustain our institutions. So,
and one of the things that I would like to chime in on that is the thing that we're working with on our side is research parks. It's overlooked on the HBCU campuses, but you're seeing a lot of universities now moving to research parks for research and development, for consolidation of bringing researchers in, corporations in at the same time. We are working with the Research Institute of the colleges today, and with one gentleman who actually put together the Huntsville, Alabama Research Park, which you had the NASA space program and everything else that came out of that. And we're pushing today, and the dollars that are available for minority issues, minority-related social issues and economic issues are all being funded up through these different departments, as John talked about. But one thing that would help is if we take the land mass and we actually change our process a bit and start looking at taking your land mass and actually developing research parks, bringing a focus on research, technical assistance, bringing your schools together. That's a real win-win at the end of the day.
I agree. And unfortunately, we are 1 minute away from the end of our time, and technology, as it were, I was saying this earlier, is going to cut us off. But I think it's a great place to end because Rachel Grace has just commented that, or asked, how can we address the COVID-related realities? Through research, through telling the story and documenting the narrative. HBCUs have responded very effectively to COVID-19 under the circumstances. The fight continues. Thank you, four gentlemen, for your contributions and your support of HBCUs. We are stronger because of you. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Thanks to our viewing audience. Please stay tuned. We'll have a 15-minute break and come back at 9:45 with a session facilitated by McKinsey & Company about the impact and the landscape going forward for HBCUs in 2020. Thank you all for participating. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you. Thank you for seeing everyone.